Hi, I'm Jim Shultz. I'm the farmer here, and along with my wife, Annie. We have been here for 20 years. Started out, well, really way back when, as a 19-year-old, as an apprentice on farms, and we've continued the tradition here, and we have apprentices who help us with our farm. But we came here really to raise our kids and to slowly build a homestead. And 5 years ago, after teaching for 26 years in the public school system, I retired, and I'm farming full time, and my wife Annie is a full-time nurse. So we'll talk more about the farm later, but that's sort of a brief intro of me.
My name's Dan Kittredge. I'm a longtime farmer. I grew up on an organic farm in Barrie, which is in the center part of the state. Still live there. And for the past 10 years, I've been running the Bionutrient Food Association, which is an educational organization focusing on increasing quality in the food supply. And by quality, we're talking about flavor, aroma, nutritive value, etc.
So just a brief overview. We're on 10 acres. Extends from Route 7 to the back North Main here, and then we lease the bottom 3 that are down over there for pasture for our animals. We have about 2 acres under cultivation for beyond organic vegetables, and then we also raise pastured heritage chickens and turkeys and pigs. And we breed our turkeys and pigs. They're heritage breeds that are considered endangered by the Livestock Breeds Conservancy, and we're trying to kind of bring them back and preserve their genetics, while also reintroduce people to what food used to be, how turkey and chicken used to taste before Cornish cross and broad-breasted white. So we've been working the land slowly for 20 years, but really intensively for more like the last 7 or 8. Gradually improving what we have. This was all overgrown. Just the little area around the house was mowed, and then everything else was kind of grown up, and so we found there's junkyards and things scattered all over the place, and had to get that all cleaned up. So we are in a permanent raised bed system for our vegetables. We use organic practices. We're not certified organic. We also use biodynamic, and we've incorporated some permaculture aspects into what we do as well. So as we walk around, I'll kind of talk about how we establish things. We have basically 6 different plots. Because we're on a hill like this, and we don't have one beautiful, nice, flat area, we've had to kind of develop where we can. There's some terrace beds over there we'll be looking at, and little plots all over. And it's gradually kind of grown as we've gone. So what's interesting to note is how the quality of the produce changes depending on how long the soil has been worked, and the practices that we've used as we went along. When we first started out, we knew we'd never we didn't have enough resources, and we didn't be big enough to be doing tractor farming, nor do we need that. So we use a BCS, which is a walk-behind tractor, which is really, we'll be looking at. It's very common in Europe and in small bed systems. And unfortunately, the tool that always gets shipped with the BCS is a tiller. So that was the first implement we had, and we used it to kind of break ground and to get things going, and very quickly found that it was really rewarding to have tilled your stuff up, and it was all nice, beautiful, soft soil. But then very quickly after the first rain, or definitely within the first month, everything compacted, and we started to have all the problems that you'd see with tillage. We get a crusting on the top. Our soil structure would kind of basically disappeared. We don't have many earthworms in this soil to begin with. This is Nellis loam that we're on up here, and we have an Amenia silt loam down low. All of Mount Greylock drains through this basin right through our lower pasture, which partly is that because the town and the wisdom has stopped the drainage system right at the corner of our property, so that anything that overflows there flows right through. But so we have a beautiful silt loam down there that's 4 feet deep. We brought in NRCS to help us with some drainage, and they said, well, first we have to find where your topsoil ends. They got down to 4 feet, and they said, we can't go any further. You've got loam all the way down to that point. So we have good soil, but for some reason it's really devoid of, not devoid, there's very few worms. It's a very calcareous soil, very our pH naturally is like 7 in the low 7s, so that's pretty high. But anyway, so this when we started out, we tilled that, and there's just a little plot. And then as we went along, we decided we were going to stop tilling. So we now, to open up new land, new soil, new plots, we tarp for a year, and then we do one pass with a rotary plow on the BCS, which doesn't churn the soil so much as kind of push it over to the side. And then that's the last time that we actually invert the soil in any way. We use broad forks, and we do use raised beds. I know different people have different preferences. We like them because we feel that they drain better when we do have heavy rain events. The soil seems to warm up faster. It does, because we have so many people coming through the farm. I didn't mention we're a 100-family CSA. People come to the farm. There is pick your own for portions of it. And just to have an established walkway is really nice. So for those reasons, and also the fact that when the beds are raised, when you're bending and picking over, they're at least up 6 inches, so you're bending over 6 inches less when you're doing all the work. So for all those reasons, we like raised beds. So we create the beds. They're permanent, and every other year we lift them up again because they do settle down. This is in the second year, so we'll be using the rotary plow to create the raised beds again. What we do is we go down the walkway, and the rotary plow kicks up the soil up on top of the bed. So during the year in between, we use whatever we have as the mulch to start to it's sort of like a sheet mulch. It's a way to develop organic matter that then gets kicked up into the bed. So one year it'll be wood chips, and then we give those wood chips, that pile over there has been sitting for a year and a half. So next year, after we raise these up, we'll put wood chips down, so they have a full year to completely break down again before we kick them up. And then the next year we come through with our hay mulch, and you'll see how we use our BCS to make our own hay bales, and we roll those out into the walkways. And then it ends up being, depending on the crops, at least once and sometimes 2 times we'll broad fork the beds. We soil test yearly and amend the soil tests. So, and again, we go through BFA for our recommendations, and we test with Logan Labs. And
how about in-season fertility?
In the fall, if we're lucky, we'll amend our trace nutrients, and then depending on, you'll see our compost situation. Depending on how much compost we have, we'll either buy in some or bring in some. And apply compost in the fall, not in the spring. And we'll use alfalfa meal and crayers as our predominant nitrogen sources, in addition to the micronutrients that we're applying.
I'm sorry, what did you say you use for nitrogen?
So alfalfa meal.
And crayers is composted chicken manure.
Yeah, crayers is organic composted chicken manure. It's a 5-4-3. And so, depending on the crop, that determines how much nitrogen we'll be putting on. So nitrogen is the thing that's variable. And if it was a heavy feeder that got pulled out early, we'll come in maybe with some more alfalfa meal. We like alfalfa meal. Both of those break down relatively slowly. And alfalfa has some supposedly biostimulating properties to it that seem to bear out for us.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Any foliar sprays or drenches or anything like that?
Thank you. So we work with AEA, Advancing Eco-Agriculture, John Kemp's organization, and we have a full foliar program with them. So we're foliar feeding, depending on timing, but at least every other week, if not every week, depending on the crop. So AEA we used to foliar feed, but we foliar fed our own sort of a compost tea solution, or if we had a manure tea.
And foliar spraying, just for those who don't know, is to spray. Foliar feeding is to spray nutrients on the leaf surface, onto the foliage.
So we'll mix up a liquid solution, a
Yeah.
backpack sprayer with a pump, and spray. And foliar feeding is the nutrients are taken up very rapidly within an hour to within a day or so. And can have a very rapid effect on the health of the plant. So AEA has a program that is geared towards fruiting crops versus vegetative crops, and with our tomatoes, it's geared to the time of development. We also fertigate. Mostly our tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, so our fruiting crops. We will fertigate occasionally. Our vegetative crops, most of that is with foliar sprays. So
What does fertigate mean?
fertigate is to take a solution and to put it. We use drip tape for our irrigation, and we do use wobblers, which are overhead when we're germinating our crops like carrots and arugula and things that need to be consistently moist.
You repeat it because she
So
doesn't have
the question was, could we talk about what are the solutions that we use for foliar feeding? AEA, Advancing Agriculture, is led by John Kempf, has a whole line of, we use their organic line of products that have carefully formulated, all the trace elements. Well, those are separate, and then also have some biostimulant and inoculant products. For instance, we're carefully applying things like zinc, copper, magnesium, manganese, boron where appropriate, and then those are the traces, and those are applied depending on the various crops. And then there's more sort of holistic mixes, photomag, which is mostly magnesium, but it's a photosynthetics enhancing product. So there's all these different things, and we mix them together in sort of along recipes that are recommended, and apply those. So unlike what we used to do, which was very sort of by the seat of the pants, and we may not have known what we were applying, because when we made up the compost tea, who knows how good the compost was to start with, and how many, what we had in there for microbial life and whatnot. It could have been good, it could have been bad. And sometimes we'd see effects, sometimes we wouldn't. And in this way, we know exactly what we're applying. When we're applying calcium, we know to the milliliter per 100 feet how much calcium we're applying, and that we know that, say, for instance, with tomatoes, exactly, depending on where they are in their life cycle, how much we need to be applying. And so we'll do that with the foliar, but also with fertigation as well. So it's a way to really optimize the nutrients that you're delivering to the plants. And then along with that is all the inoculation. So there's a lot of their products have various microbial things that you're putting into the soil or onto the plant surface.
So the microbial also is a foliar application?
So there's a product called Micro 5000, which has some microbes that you're applying to the leaves. Part of that and it worked out very effectively with our tomatoes. We got leaf mold a lot. So as soon as we start to see that, we'll increase the amount of Micro 5000 that we're putting on it to try to shift the balance towards a beneficial population versus a less beneficial population that is going to contribute to the leaf mold. And then also up various other nutrients that are there. Dan, you've had a long relationship with John and we're there at the start. Do you want to chime in on any of this?
We can go down that. Depending on how curious people are about the details, but on the microbes, there's basically different microbes that live on the leaf surface of the plant that live in the soil, and so that's your inoculants for the seed or a transplanting or something like that would be different than the ones you would be putting in a foliar spray. But yeah, as far as the different mineral levels and ratios in the sprays and stuff like that, I'm not sure it's an art yet. It's well, maybe it's an art, not a science. There's all kinds of different people who have different philosophies and incentives about different ways of feeding your plants. We can say that in nature things seem to do pretty well without anything being added, and so the objective would be to get to that point. But because we're not in a natural environment with things that are indigenous, etc., then there's ways to sort of support the overall health, and that's basically the objective, is to create a dynamic where the plant's flourishing as opposed to And that, the sort of the concept is that when the plant is healthy, then it doesn't succumb to disease or infestation. It's only when the plant is weak to begin with that that is able to happen. So sort of a proactive fertility program to maintain sufficient levels of nutrients in the leaf, et cetera, will effectively ensure resistance to pest and disease, as well as increased nutrient levels and presumably carbon exudation into the soil and everything else.
Yeah, no, I was just curious about that because I've done, microbial applications for soil, and
As something that you would spray onto the leaf. And my thought has always been that if the compost is from the soil, then the microbes from that should be in the soil, not on the leaf.
right.
So you can make your own teas. You can go out to nature and just harvest leaves off of plants and that look shiny and stick them in a bucket, and you can make your own foliar inoculant if you want, or you can buy them.
Localized for the microenvironment of the farm.
Yeah, some people want to buy things. Some people want to make their own. It's either way. It's a technique that can be very valuable.
If I could add one component too, just from the soil perspective, I think one of the things that I find really interesting about John Kemp and his methods is that a lot of what he's doing is geared toward making the plants photosynthesize more efficiently. And what I've learned from John Kemp is that when plants are photosynthesizing at a higher efficiency, what they're doing is actually moving more carbon into the soil. So John Kemp talks about it as the big gear and the little gear that are connected, right? So if you can try to turn the big gear, adding carbon to the soil through compost, wood chips, things like that. But actually the more powerful gear is to turn the little gear, the plant, by making it photosynthesize more effectively and therefore pushing more carbon through photosynthesis through the liquid carbon pathway into exudates into the soil. You can actually bring more carbon into the soil more quickly and more efficiently using that pathway than just trying to add embodied carbon to the soil.
So that was a deep dive into the carbon sequestration conversation.
Which is what I'm...
We all have our things we wonk out about. That's one of Carol's things.
Yeah.
The basic principle is that plants have green leaves because they're covered in chloroplasts. And inside those chloroplasts occurs a process called photosynthesis. And in nature, plants are not being fed fertilizer. They, through the process of making sugar, then inject a lot of that into the soil to feed the microbes in the soil, which then digest the soil and feed the plant. And so that process of photosynthesis is one of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, because that's one of the ingredients in photosynthesis. And that's then injected into the soil, and you effectively can dramatically increase soil carbon levels through that process of growing healthy plants. And I think what John talks about is the number of chloroplasts on the leaf. To build that organelle, to build that process requires a number of different elements. You need the copper, you need the zinc, you need the whatever all the different elements are. And in many cases, a leaf that is green but not potentially necessarily dark green, it will have chloroplasts in it, but not a lot of them. And so that's what the photostem, was that what it is? Not
Photomag.
Photomag. Yeah, Photomag is basically a foliar spray that has in it all of the elements necessary to build chloroplasts. And so if you spray that onto the leaves of the plants, you functionally can double or triple or quadruple the amount of photosynthetic activity the leaf is engaging in. For whatever reason, if the microbes weren't working well in the soil or the plant wasn't healthy and it couldn't access what it needed to make each leaf work as well as it could, it's like a solar panel working at 20% of effectiveness as opposed to 80% effectiveness. By simply adding those things to increase that photosynthetic capacity, you basically stimulate the overall process. So, seems to work.
Right. So for us, we're trying to make...
And there's pretty good science behind it too. Like all the enzyme pathways and everything else are nicely tracked out. And
Right.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to make a living at what we're doing. So we had done it, made our home stuff in the past, but when time is of the essence and we need to have a sense that what we're doing is an effective use of time, that was one of the reasons that we shifted to John's program. And Dan mentioned that something I forgot to say was from the very start, we want to give every seed that head start, that relationship with the microbes. So one of the things we put on is a substance called Biocoat Gold, which is a dusting of microbes
It's an
right
inoculant from AEA. It's a seed inoculant.
I
Yeah.
couldn't hear what you said either.
Oh, so it's a seed inoculant.
Yep.
So right from the start, we want to establish that relationship between the microbes and the seed to give that plant that head start. And so we're dusting all of the seeds with this microbe sort of powder.
Yeah. It's a broad spectrum of bacteria and fungi, many sort of families of each. And so I'd liken it to the sort of concept of colostrum, that when a baby's born, the first thing coming out of the mother's breast is colostrum, not milk, because you need to have established the gut flora before you can digest. In the same way, the seed should have its gut flora established at birth, at germination, so that it can digest the soil, because that's how the plants evolve to grow. So, very, very potent technique.
Sure.
And you can make your own, or you can buy them.
No,
And great if you want to make them, but
right. And I think you best, when we kind of ease out in the next decade or so from commercial farming and doing more homesteading, I'll be doing a lot more of making my own stuff, which I think in some ways is more fun. But like I said, we're trying to make a living at this. So. So we do, as I said, we've got four apprentices. This is some of their housing. 3 of the apprentices live on the property, and 1 is off. And we have 2 hourly workers that come in and help with pick wash. So we're effectively a crew, including myself, of 5. We had a volunteer, young 15-year-old kid come in some of the summer. He was great. And yeah, then our hourly folks. We work with a group called Roots Rising, which is a high school group that works with at-risk youth and gets them onto farms to do self-development and group development. And 2 of those people they come weekly and then throughout the school year. 2 of those folks are now workers with us, and they're fantastic. So why don't we jump over here. Spectrum, some caterpillar tunnels. That was both from Farmers. That caterpillar tunnel, I'm sick of using as a caterpillar. A caterpillar tunnel is essentially ropes hold the plastic down, and the friction of the ropes holds the plastic in place as you move it up and down. So you can see that in effect there. That was also like that over there. After a while, it gets old, moving the plastic up and down 2 or 3 times a day. And so we just put on pipes, and now we can just roll it up and down really easily. This is the new incarnation, which I really like. It's got Gothic ends on it and a much bigger volume of space, so it doesn't heat up and cool down as quickly. What we like about the caterpillar tunnels is the ability to move them from place to place. So every year we can have them on fresh soil, and that's been just fantastic. The high tunnels, I couldn't live without them, but we're starting to have, you get a honeymoon period of like 3 years, I'd say, before you start to have some serious issues. I do want to poke our head in and show you, have you look at some peppers in here and talking about soil health. Peppers planted on the exact same day, everything is exactly the same fertility program. The peppers here versus the peppers in ground that was new ground that we moved to the caterpillar over. Just night and day difference. So what we're going to be doing is taking the tops off and just giving an entire year and letting it flush through. But that's hard when you only have, we're putting up a third, there'll be a third one over there. So then we can do a better rotation. So we do have 2 heated spaces. That's on propane. We try not to use fossil fuels, but it's pretty much essential to get things going early to be competitive in the market. First to market with tomatoes or peppers or eggplant is a huge advantage. And this has a backup heater, but this is a climate battery. We'll talk about that more when we look in that space. So what we're doing there is taking all the hot air that's normally exhausted during the season, and it's pulled underground into about 2/3 of a mile of pipes that are 4 feet in the ground at 3 different levels. And that heats the soil up to close to high 60s, low 70s by the end of the summer. And we're able to get all the way through December and into January without using any propane to grow our greens and maintaining a temperature that with at least the bare minimum towards the end is a 10-degree temperature differential, but usually around 15 to 20 degrees. So we can keep it at about low 40s up until into December with just the stored ground heat. And what's happening is there's actually a small fan that's circulating that air through all the time. So in the early summer, we'll look in the summer, it's pulling that hot air, it's heating the soil, and it's blowing out cool air. So we can keep this house closed until 10 or 11 o'clock because the soil is cooling and drying the air before it comes out. And in the winter, it's reversed. As it goes through, it's going to heat that air and moisten it, which is, the moisture can be a problem sometimes in the winter, but not as badly. And then it's keeping that space warm. We also have a thermal curtain in there, which again we'll show you. It closes at night to keep that heat in, because most of the heat loss is obviously through. We also have solar wrap. This is a bubble material that's been used in Germany, or it started out in Germany. It's been used in Europe for 25 years. It doesn't photodegrade, and it doesn't require a fan. This has to have a fan running basically 24/7 for most of the year to keep the plastic inflated. So the solar wrap doesn't require that. So anyway, that's kind of the range from low-end Caterpillar tunnels to higher-end high tunnels. First, before you've built your tunnel.
Yep.
So basically, we dug out a swimming pool underneath here, so 4 feet deep in the size of the thing. The sides are insulated in a kind of unique way. Instead of going down the 4 feet, it goes down 2 feet and out 2 feet, and that requires the freezing to go around, like down and around. So it's the equivalent of actually digging down 5 feet. It's a bat wing. So the insulation 2-inch rigid goes down 2 feet and then out 2 feet. So anyway, it keeps that whole space cool. Because one of the problems is when you're digging down that 4 feet to get straight size and figuring out when to get your insulation in there, because you have to backfill once you dig that all out. Anyway, well, let's take a peek in here, and then we'll. I just want to show you the lower field. We'll just take a look from above. Oh, this by the way, if anyone wants to look at this, is the solar wrap material.
How much does that cost?
Solar wrap is about 4 to 5 times more expensive than double layer plastic, but when you consider that it's a 25-year lifespan,
Yeah.
and we're not throwing that in the landfill.
That's amazing.
And you can put it on. We put these on with just 2 people. It's in 4-foot strips if you look at it, and so it comes in a roll, and it goes into this track. So you can just take this and pull the whole thing. Start with one side on a roll, and pull all the way over. And it's very high. It's got a very, very high snow load. So essentially, it can take that.
Where can you source that?
So if you just go to Solar Wrap, just Google Solar Wrap, SOLAWRAP, and you'll get the owner of the company when you call. He's this really, Manny I think is his name. He's this really benefit of having disease-resistant plants versus ones that aren't. This lower and lean system, if you haven't seen it, some of the plants that are over here actually have root systems over there. So every time we lean it, that gets moved until you get to the end, and then it wraps around. Lower and lean. Yeah, and so it's a way. Some of these tomatoes are well over 15 feet long.
And how old are they?
They went in. They were producing in June. They went in April.
Okay.
Early April.
And you'll keep them going?
And we'll keep them for another 2 weeks. We topped them, so the fruit's starting to ripen a lot better. But yeah, reflective material that we can extend, that closes at night. And also during the summer, it's amazing to control the, normally you're going to get 90-degree temperatures in your high tunnel. but so it say around noon to 1 o'clock we'll close this up and keep the temperature down. So it is actually ambient air temperature, not the heat of the sun. But then in the winter, it reflects about 65% of IR or more, I think. So it's a way to keep the heat in and keep our heating costs down when we're using propane in the early season. So like I said, for greens, we don't use the propane, but as soon as we start tomatoes in here, they need to be at the lowest nighttime temperature can be 45 is really low, ideally 50 degrees or higher. So if we're gonna run the propane, we don't wanna be wasting it. So this curtain that goes across makes a huge difference at night.
And you're putting these, you don't keep tomatoes in here, just economically it's better for greens?
Yeah, in the winter, I mean, we're getting
through December.
$9 a pound for arugula
Yeah.
and spinach and everything else. So and also the light levels. I couldn't justify growing. And the propane required.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't justify growing tomatoes in the winter here.
Well, you said that you could keep it at 45 or something like that into
40
December.
degrees, yeah, but that's too cold, and that's, you know, like I said, that's earlier in the winter up until like the end of December, and then what happens is the heat starts to exhaust itself.
Yeah.
And the one thing I should say about the climate battery is if you hit a really cold snap, the recommendation is to run your propane, because otherwise you would drain all of the heat out of your battery and you'd be done. But anyway, it's just a nice supplement to have, and I think it was well worth it. These are the raw materials. It's just there's the intake pipes. There's one at either end. It's just a simple. I'm drawing a blank on the term.
Culvert pipe?
Culvert, thank you. Culvert pipe, and then this is this joins into this, and there's three manifolds that go across, and all the 4-inch perforated pipe goes into holes like this that are in 3 different locations around the pipe. So there's 3 different layers of pipe in there. So
You have that sitting in a bed of stone,
no, it's all soil.
soil.
And that's the best medium to conduct the heat. The stone isn't ironic, maybe it's counterintuitive, but it's not the best way to conduct the heat. The one caveat is that you can't have a high clay content, because otherwise it turns to pottery. It's very simple looking. All it is essentially is some remesh. This is like the mesh that you put into concrete, some landscape fabric, and then a pallet that has some holes drilled out in it. And this was developed by David Johnson and his wife Elaine Sue out of New Mexico, I believe. And originally they wanted to come up with something that was a way to break down dairy manure, ironically. And so it's a static composting system, so you don't have to turn it. It's very low odor, and unlike some of the static systems that are out there now, they're aerated static, so you're having to push air through them periodically to keep the aerobic level up. This, by contrast, is completely static. It doesn't require any kind of fan to blow air through it, because what you have is when you build it, you have this drainage pipe that's perforated, and that they go into each of these holes. So there's 6 of them, and because this is drilled out at the bottom and it's on the pallet, you have a constant airflow all the way through. So you build the system with these in it, and then you take these out, because within 2 days or so, the mycelium have formed around and created created the hole, so it's rigid. So you can pull this out and it doesn't collapse on itself. So the way these are arranged, there is no part of the compost that is further than 1 foot away from airflow moving through it. So it does take about a year to fully break down, but by the time it's broken down, I should say the starting materials can be a variety of things. But what David recommends, and what we've used, is raw organic cow manure, wood chips, leaves, and then we inoculate with existing compost that we've already made. I don't know, he didn't mention that in his, but we just, after doing our first one, was like, duh, we really should have inoculated that to help it get it going. So we inoculate with our own compost as well. So this is layered, and every 6 inches there's, so we start with wood chips on the bottom, and then we'll do like a layer of dairy manure, then a layer of, we use the rest of our partially composted leaves that we get from a landscaper, and then just alternate it all the way up with these in the center. And then once you get to the top, and there's a heavy moisture content. So it's about 60% water to start with. So we're soaking all of the wood chips in a water bath before we put them in, because one of the things that can happen is if you don't have enough water, it's gonna dry out. Once it dries out, you don't get the biological activity going on, and it may not turn out to be what you want. In New Mexico, where David does it, they have a complete irrigation system that he has on top. So every day it's not that much. Every day he's watering for a minute a day. And I guess he's got it on a timer, and it's just a hoop of 1-inch plastic pipe with little emitters that come off of that. So there's holes drilled in the bottom to get to the edge, and he's got emitters that he puts into the center and soaks that down that way. So in our, we built the first one a year ago with our Roots Rising kids I was talking about, and they had quite a deal dealing with raw dairy manure, because these are kids from Pittsfield, from the city, and that ended up being kind of fun. But so yeah, within a year it breaks down, and what's different about it is that it's almost like a paste. It's not like regular compost. So the way we use it, and the way David recommends using it, is not so much as traditional compost like that. That's from a local farm that's a compost maker. So it doesn't end up like that. It's broken down more, and instead of using that, that's more like an amendment material. This is more like an inoculant. So we've tried spraying this on, and we also, in the end, we ended up just taking and just like we put on our other amendments, we just distributed it across the top of our beds to try to inoculate. So this can stretch. In his system, the way they're spraying it on, this could do like 40 acres supposedly. We ended up using it a lot more intensely than that. Unfortunately, even though we'd like to do a lot of research on the farm, we didn't really have the time, so we didn't do a controlled double-blind study with our to see how this actually turned out. But we're pretty happy with it in general. It's kind of like a set it and forget it. And James was asking about irrigation. So the way last year we had good intentions of having a regular schedule, and when we watered our greenhouse to water this. But we had so much rain last year, we didn't end up having to do it, and the moisture level stayed really good. This year we just built this a week ago, so this year we would have probably had to have a regular system. And to be honest, I would have to have it on a timer, otherwise I wouldn't get to it, unless it was part of the routine of like when we irrigate the high tunnel, we irrigate this. So it does, after a year, it's down to about here, so it breaks down quite substantially. And you can actually, there's a bench on this side if you guys want to look in, and you can already start to see some of the white hyphae in the tunnels. It's pretty cool.
Families of plants have different gut flora. Like a chicken has a different gut flora from a cow. Pigweed has a different gut flora from spinach. And what tillage does, in shredding the structure of the soil, is to functionally create a dynamic where the fungi are at a much weaker lower level and the bacteria are at a much higher level, which is basically optimal for what we call weeds. And so, tillage is a strategy functionally to create a microbiome where the weeds will flourish. And most of what we call crops prefer a fungally dominant, or at least a balanced bacterial fungal ecosystem. Compost that is turned, in the process of being regularly turned, functionally it does the same effect as the tillage, which is it creates a dynamic where most of the microbes in there are bacteria, not fungi. And so when you apply a bacterially dominant compost to your fields, you're not necessarily getting that fungal ecosystem that we understand correlates with carbon sequestration, et cetera, et cetera. So what they've been able to do with this type of compost, which is static, which is, I would say, how nature does things. Nature doesn't actually turn compost piles. Nature just drops things on the ground and lets them digest. Is they're functionally understanding it as, like you said, an inoculant, not as a compost. Like, we're not adding 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre. We're adding 500 trillion microbe spores, and they're getting really, really impressive results with carbon sequestration in relatively conventionally farmed fields with chemicals and tractors and things like that, by using this at the rate of something like 3 or 4 pounds to the acre. So it's very, very interesting. And he's working, you talked about Tim LaSalle. I think Tim and David are working fairly closely together at Chico State.
Look at the south end down the far end. You can see a break about 2/3 down where it just like drops in height. So this first part was actually a short bed that's been worked for 3 years. And the last part of it is we had enough room, and we pushed it a little bit to open that up this year. So the last part of it is brand new, is new soil. And just the amount of time and the biology and everything else that we've been doing with the soil, you can see that how that affects the growth rate of the plant. But anyway, and in the lettuce here, that isn't the effect. That effect is rabbits. So the rabbits come in, they only feel safe going in a little ways. They'll top all the babies, and that only happened starting the last month or so. I just wanted people to see with the quality of the soil. I meant to have you see the peppers that were in there when we poked our head in. The peppers in the other high tunnel are only about 2 feet high, and they look not very healthy. They went at the exact same time as these peppers in here. These ones obviously are 5 feet higher or higher, and that the only difference is having fresh soil that wasn't in the high tunnel. So it can be disease. It can be we're working on keeping the microbial level up in there. So it's just the fact that the soil it's in an unnatural environment, hasn't got natural rain. We're using just well water to irrigate it. We are irrigating in there the pathways, which a lot of people don't. So there's drip all the way across the entire bed, so we don't get these deserts of no life in the walkways. But even with doing that, it doesn't make a difference. But so yeah.
And the way to address that is basically what's going on is that you have salts build up and things like that in the soil that rain would flush out. And so if you do have a permanent hoop house, like you were saying, just taking the plastic off the top and letting it rain for a season through that'll help leach a lot of what gets built up out, and then you can it will work better.
Right. So yeah, so next
Because
year
you're not going to be moving it.
No, we're not going
Right.
to move it. So the hard part is timing, right? Because the whole point of a high tunnel is so that you can start your crops early. But if you have your plastic off through the winter and your soil's then gotten cold and you've lost the opportunity to have a windless period to put your thing on, how does that work? So we're going to use that far high tunnel that we're taking the plastic off of is our prop house. So the plants will be on tables to start with. And then as soon as our propagation period is over, that'll come out, plastic will come off, and that'll become growing beds for other crops during the season while the top's off. And then presumably we'll have our new high tunnel and be able to switch that in. So it's just kind of a shuffling thing.
Take it off in May and put it back on September or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, this is our little orchard here. We've got about 40 some odd trees, some mixed varieties. They're all on native rootstock. None of them are dwarfs. Peaches, pears, Asian pears, apples, cherries, a couple, some chestnuts at the end. And so because of our hillside here, we put these in on a Berm and Swale, and we used the Hugelkulture method. So we had a bunch of the hedgerow trees there fall down one year, and rather than burn the wood, we cut it up. We dug down about a 4-foot ditch, so to speak, and put all the soil on the top side. And then we put all of the woody material on the bottom. And then we took the soil that was on the top and pulled it back over and created a swale above it. The idea is to capture the water as it goes downhill and let it percolate down into the woody material, which acts like a sponge, and also, in theory, creates a more fungally, more forest-like soil for trees to grow in, because trees don't really want to be growing in a pasture-based area. So then we planted on top of that berm. We did the spacing so that we could do alley cropping in between. So right now we've established the two different areas, and we're kind of working our way down. The next section is pretty steep, so we'll have to do a little bit more terracing there. These are mildly terraced, they kind of step down, and this other one here, not quite so much because we had it in squash this year. But anyway, this has worked out really well for us, and we also plant in between the trees. Right now it's just things like pumpkins, but as the canopy fills out, we'll be doing that less and less. So that's that orchard system. I don't know if anybody has any questions. This is where we compost, and we do most of our compost for areas that we're not super concerned about, because this is ad hoc composting. So it's basically everything that gets pulled out. We started at this end and then gradually move it down, and we pull from the far end and then use that to apply, mostly to the orchards, to our perennials, and to our urban flower beds. And then the reason for that is that because it's basically a static system. We do turn it occasionally, but we can't be guaranteed that we've gotten temperatures that will kill weed seeds, which, I'm not necessarily sure that, that's a thing anyway. It kind of feels like seeds can stick around through a lot of stuff, and I don't know how keeping your compost at 140 to 150 degrees is necessarily going to guarantee that you killed all the weed seed. But we don't tend to put it in our gardens, just because we don't want to, our main growing area, so we don't want to introduce that. So the rest of this area is all pasture, and we use it for our animals. Right now our chickens are down there. We raise 2 breeds and breed them ourselves, black Australorps, which is a good egg-laying bird. They hold the record actually for egg laying back in the day. And not so much now. That's why we're trying to improve the genetics. And then we also do buckeyes. So our buckeye breeders live down there in that little house, and they are the parents of all of our, we do several hundred meat birds a year that we raise up and sell. And it varies from year to year, depending on, like this COVID year, we did more than we did last year, but not as much as we've done in the past. It's sort of a labor of love. People don't know how to cut up whole chicken, and because we process on farm, we walked right by our processing equipment and show you. People, that's how we have to sell them, because if we're not supervised, like gosh, I'm drawing blanks today. Like a normal processing facility. We do have an inspector who comes through, and we have to meet various criteria, and we have to test 5 birds, and they have to get to a certain temperature every time. But in order to sell it from the farm, processed on the farm, we can only sell whole birds. So again, people have a hard time with that. So it's mildly profitable, but not as much as it should be. So we vary depending on how we're feeling during the year. But we do pasture-raised heritage standard bronze turkeys, which they are extremely good. They do a great job.
Profitable?
And they're very profitable because, yeah, it's Thanksgiving, so you can charge a premium, and they are heritage, and the flavor is just night and day. Once people taste one, we can't raise enough.
What is it called, the breed again?
It's called
Bronze.
Standard Bronze. It's actually the original American turkey. It came over from Europe. There was some breeding here with the wild turkeys, then it went back, and it came back again. But essentially, it was the first American domestic turkey.
It came from Europe originally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it in a nutshell. Oh, so everything's rotated. Nothing stays longer than 2 weeks in a spot, and basically it's based on we're keeping an eye on the health of the pasture. And so sometimes it can be more often, but mostly we're giving them a big enough area that they can stay on it for 10 days to 2 weeks. But it's also the managed pastured idea where if you have them in a small enough space, they're going to eat everything. even things that they may not be palatable for them, and that's a better way to manage the pasture. We kind of treat them like cows in the sense that their scratching and their manure has the same effect as if you're doing intensive rotational grazing, sort of. This pasture was an incredible weedy mess that we did nothing with except put animals on and move around, and now it's fairly good grass. So the pigs are in a wagon wheel situation, so they have the primo spot under the shade. They have you can see the kind of fence around them, but then every 10 days they get a new like slice of the pie that comes off of their center hub, and so they move all the way around twice, and then by that time they've reached maturity, pretty much. So this is a BCS. This is an older model. It's an 853. We've kind of souped it up a little bit, put on bigger wheels. These are no flat and weighted. One of the issues with the BCS is when you're pulling around some heavy equipment, the machine itself is kind of light. So to have the extra weight on the machine by having weighted no flat tires is kind of nice. It's a really ingenious machine. It's Italian made. It's very adjustable. So right now it's not attached to anything. I should say that this is the PTO, the power takeoff. So this is where you can hook up to your various equipment that needs to have something that's in motion. So these teeth just fit into matching teeth on the other side, and this is all a gear-driven engine, and there's no belts or anything drives the various equipment. The handles can switch around from front to back, so that you can have a front-mounted piece of equipment, or this is a retrofit. When these eventually over time, these handles, this gets loose and these handles pop off, so we just put in some pins. So these handles can adjust so you can walk in your walkway, but if you want to have a rear-mounted piece of equipment, the handles flip all the way around, and you can adjust them so you can have a piece of equipment that's mounted in the back, which is pretty handy. So this is a gasoline engine. You can get a diesel as well. Diesel is a little bit more powerful. So just a trade-off. These are a little bit less expensive. So this can drive a whole range of equipment from, this is the Flail mower, which we're going to use in a second. This is just a regular brush hog. This is a hay rake, this little monster. This is just a sickle bar cutter. This is a roller crimper. This is our rotary plow. This is a power harrow. And this isn't BCS, but I put it out because this is one of our essential pieces of equipment. It's just a flame weeder. No, I was talking about the flame weeder. Oh, yes. So the roller crimper, roller crimping is a way to take a cover crop, or basically any crop, not any crop, but a lot of crops, but it's mostly cover crop. And you want to terminate it. And we want to keep the roots in the ground, because that's just an essential principle that Dan can speak more about, but that to keep those microbes alive, to have living roots that's taking those exudates and putting them down there, or just to have the organic matter from the roots in the soil is really important. So if we have a cover crop and we want to terminate it, instead of mowing it, we can roll over with this extremely heavy piece of equipment that's pulled behind the BCS. And if you just roll down a cover crop, you may think, oh, I did it. I rolled it down, it's laying over. But come back a little bit of time later, and a lot of that cover crop will have popped right back up. To actually kill it, so you can have mulch in place with roots in the ground, if you crimp it, so basically take these somewhat sharp metal bars, it's not going to cut the crop, but it'll crimp it. It'll put a dent in it, so that no longer the xylem and phloem is broken and you cannot get any transfer of nutrients or water through the plant. So this, usually roller crimpers, it was developed by Rodale down there. They're tractor mounted and they're huge. And so this is the one that was developed for the BCS. And to be honest with you, you've used it only a few times. It works fairly well. It's a little squirrely, but it's nice because it fits on our bed system. So if we have cover crop on our 30-inch bed, this is able to run okay on it. We do have to put some extra weights on here we found to get it to be as heavy as it should be. But if on a smaller crop, like we don't have anything that's high enough right now, otherwise we would have demoed it. You really want something that's going to be at least 18 inches or so, up to 2 to chest high. So it's something that you might plant in the fall and roll down before a brassica crop in the spring, or people use it for garlic. So planting a cover crop and rolling it down right now, so the cover crop would have been planted earlier in the summer and would be now the right height. Roll and crimp that and plant your garlic into that. So there's a whole variety of different things that people are experimenting with. It's really timing sensitive. So like you need to get it just at the right stage. Otherwise, you may not necessarily kill the crop that you're working on. So they found that vetch doesn't roll or crimp very well. Rye can if you get it at the right stage, but it cannot if you get it too late. So anyway, a lot of timing, a lot of research going on.
What about stones?
Pardon me?
Stones.
Stones?
It'll roll over stones.
It'll roll over stones?
Oh yeah, this rolls over stones, yeah. So sort of an ingenious technique that they're using up in Frith Farm with Daniel Mays is they, if you want to try a low-tech technique, is to take a piece of 2x, take a T-post. You guys know what T-posts are? That's a metal post like this.
Yeah.
Oh, those, yeah.
You want a T-post, you cut your 2x that's long enough for your, like a 30-inch bed, bolt on your T-post. You got this metal bar here. Put a rope on either side. If you're going to do it with 2 people, you can make it that wide, or 1 person. You put this side down, and you got, remember romper stompers? You remember those when you were a little kid? It was those things you stood on and had little things and you walked along. So it's the same kind of concept. You lift it up, put it down. So you can have metal, you can have posts, like wooden posts, or just a rope. Lift it up, put it down, step on it, so it's crimping down, and keep pushing forward. Keep pushing that forward into the crop. And that's the way they're doing it, and it seems to be working. But frankly, I think I'd rather use this. So that's the roller crimping technique. So
Can you say, just before we move on from like this idea of how you terminate your cover crop, I'm interested in sort of like, in what cases, what applications would you roller crimp versus use the sickle mower versus use the flail mower?
okay, so really, like I said, this is a new tool for us, and because of the exigencies of our system, which is basically cropping all the way into October, having every bed in production for most of the year, we get cover crop on about 25% or less of our beds, and we get it on right about now. If we get it on late August, early September, we use a winter kill cover crop, so it's going to get up to about a foot before we get a hard killing frost, and then it dies in place, and it's still there in the spring, and we have a little bit of a mulch, so we have protection over the entire winter, but something that's not going to get in the way. Because one of the problems with a no-till system is if you have a rye cover crop or something that's going to have a heavy root mass in the ground, is what do you do with that? Come spring, it does, in a no-till system with conventional cover cropping, it pushes everything back, because you have to wait, it keeps the soil from warming up quicker, and you have that whole root mass to deal with. So the way that we've dealt with the root mass, when we tried that way, was to use the flail mower, flail mow twice, put on a tarp right after that, and then let it sit. But to be honest with you, again, we're trying to make a living at it, and it pushed us 2, 3, sometimes a month beyond where we would normally be if we would just do what I started to talk about, which was do a winter kill cover crop, and if it got high enough, leave it in place. If it didn't get high enough, we would tarp. So if we're going to have some beds that only have 3 to 4 inches of a cover crop, and we use a multi-species winter kill, so it would be things like oats, a field pea, we use a tillage radish, buckwheat, and sorghum Sudan grass. And that'll get to, like I said, if we put it in now, it might only get to be 4 to 6 inches. If that winter kills, it may not provide enough cover for us, but what it will provide is roots in the ground and organic material for the microbes at the soil interface to deal with. So we put tarp over that, and now we've got protection, we've got early warm up with a tarp, and we're taking care of our microbes. So I don't know how much. I mean, again, we can't do a lot of research. So I don't know how much science there is behind it, but that's our thinking with that whole system. And then if we don't have enough tarps to tarp the entire area, so we'll take the hay that you're gonna see us make here, and we'll put that as a heavy layer on top of that as well. So that's also organic matter and protection. And so basically every piece of ground is covered. It's just not all cover cropped. So that's kind of our system. Did I answer a question?
Yeah,
I kind of got off.
that, like, if you want
Oh, so what are the different?
place.
Yeah. So during this season, we'll flail mow a lot, as much as we can. There's certain crops where it doesn't make sense to. So things like arugula, spinach, Asian greens planted as leaf, not head.
Cut and
but
come again.
Pardon me? Baby, yeah. Those we'll do the flail mower on. But things like head lettuce, though we have aspirations of keeping roots in the ground, what we found is the stumps are just too much of a bitch to deal with. So after you top the head lettuce, you've got all the stumps. And so we could offset by 6 inches. We plant on a 10-inch spacing, so we could offset by 5 inches and plant in between them. But if you want to rake off the bed or do any kind of prep, the stumps are just too much of a pain. So those crops I mentioned are the ones that we flail mow, leave roots in the ground, and leave the broken down material that the flail mower leaves to break down. We'll usually tarp right after that too for a period of like a week or so, 2 weeks, to break that material down and then plant. We use wind strips to create our plugs. We use a 72 wind strip tray. So we get a nice, beautiful, healthy plug that we'll plant into those areas with. But yeah, so that's the flail mower. The roller crimper, like I said, we haven't quite got to the point where I think we need more space, and we need to really test out a good system that I can feel comfortable doing, that's not going to set us back financially by a huge crop failure. So right now it's just been a couple of experiments, and the roller crimper works, but I haven't seen one of the also issues with this is that the crop can break down really quickly, not fairly quickly. So if I only have a 1 foot high cover crop that I'm crimping, that I'm rolling crimping, it's going to break down very rapidly. So what they're talking about is needing at least 2 to 3 feet of cover crop to have this be really effective, where you can get a full season's worth of protection out of that crimped crop. So for this, what you do is you take the handle and you essentially rotate the handle around so that this bottom plow is now the cutting plow. So that's going to throw soil up in that direction. When I come back the other way, if I want to create a furrow, like for my raised beds, how we've got that walkway in the middle, I'm going to throw soil one way going down, and then on the other side, I want to throw soil the other way coming back. So I can flip this from side to side. If I only had a single bottom, I have to go like in a circle to have it work out. So anyway, the point is that this is, whether it's a single or a double, this rotary configuration, instead of taking the soil like a moldboard plow and inverting the layers, in a moldboard plow, you're going down about 6 inches and the soil is getting turned over. This, if you watch it, what it's kind of doing is pushing the soil to the side. Just throw it up a little bit, but it's not doing as much inversion as you would with a moldboard plow. So this is a rotary plow, and we use it to break ground after we've tarped. So if we have new sod, we'll put down a tarp for 6 months, sometimes up to a year. The science on that is sort of, as far as oxygen exchange, what they're finding in this recent study was that tarping wasn't great for any kind of gas exchange, which is why sometimes when you tarped, you take back the tarp and you're like, wow, tarps are awesome, I have so many worms here. And what they're finding is that the worms are coming to the surface, not because you've created an ideal environment for them, but because they're being starved by oxygen down lower. So we've gone to tarping less than we used to, which is like up to a year sometimes. And we've also switched to landscape fabric.
Yeah, that would work. If landscape fabric is more porous.
Better exchange, yeah. So after we tarped, then we run the rotary plow through once, and then we try not to use this again except to just shape the beds. And in that case, we're taking the material that's been composting in the walkways and throwing it back up on top of the beds. So this is one piece of quote-unquote tillage equipment we use. The other is this one, which I really like, although we're starting to move away from it. This is called a rotary or power harrow, and what it does, it's got these teeth on it that can be adjusted in micro increments. So you can go as little as like 1/4 of an inch, all the way down to, you know, a full 4 inches, or it actually can't make it all the way to the bottom, but it gets down pretty far. And what it's doing is loosening up the soil and mixing the soil, but not inverting the soil. So it's not the motion of a tiller that's like this, it's the motion of your hands kind of going like this. So we use this to incorporate amendments, and also to create a finer seed bed, like if we're doing carrots or arugula direct seed, and we have a lot of debris that may be on top of the surface. This creates a very fine, smooth seed bed. It does also take any rocks and stones and it kicks them out to the side. This motion here, these are flexible. And the first couple years when you open up a new bed and you've got all those potato-sized stones, this does a great job of kicking those out, as does this. This will take a rock as big as like a basketball and kick that up. So between that and this, you're able to clear out get a lot of the rocks out of there. And then the nice thing is this roller here, this is a heavy piece of equipment, but this distributes the weight, and the roller gives you a little bit of a tamping effect to get good soil to seed contact. If you've just used a tiller and you plant your seed, you know how like fluffy the soil is. A lot of times what we found initially was you didn't have the kind of soil to seed contact that you want. It was too loose. So this kind of packs that down, creates a nice seed bed, and this tool works for that. So incorporating amendments, creating fine seed beds is mainly what we use this for. See, these are this is the flail motion I was talking about. So these are swinging around, and they're able to swing around and cut right at the soil level, and we can adjust the level of cut with this roller. So it's if you haven't seen it before, it's like it's very different than what you're used to with like a lawnmower. So that's the flail mower. BCS has come out.
There you go. That's it.
Okay, so now we can pop this thing out. All right, so why don't we just take a quick look at this before we get going with it. It's the exact same concept, only it's scaled down. So these teeth are going to be pulling the hay into a series of rollers in here, which are going to take the hay and start to roll it until it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. There's a little indicator right here on the side that when the bale gets tight enough in here, it causes this roller to turn, which is an indicator for me that it's ready. And I'll stop it and just engage the binding material, which will just put it's about 1.5 rolls around on this. So the downside is this is plastic, so there's a little bit of plastic involved. But the upside is you get to make your own hay.
You get to
and
make
it's a
your
round
own
bale.
hay and bale your own hay.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing is that the old farmers look at you really funny. Like you see the pickup truck slow down in the back and they're looking out at you. That's kind of how it works.
So it was about 12 or 14 years ago that I started sort of looking into the literature to see if there was more to organic than just not using chemicals or synthetics per se, and attended a conference called Acres USA, which is out in the Midwest. It's sort of rotated around the Midwest. I think it was St. Louis to Louisville to Minneapolis or something like that. But there's a sort of a community of researchers and practitioners, agronomists that were operating more on scale, who were following what they considered to be biological principles. They weren't permaculture or biodynamic or organic or IPM, or they were like, life is the thing and that's the center, and let's see if we can understand how to work more well with life. And so I feel like I learned a lot of relevant concepts there that I had not learned in the biodynamic or organic or permaculture circles. and sort of a lens to integrate them through, and started, shifting practices on the farm that were still within the certified organic framework, but sort of coming from a different perspective, and rapidly saw, dramatic decreases in pest and disease pressure, getting down to like no more potato bugs, no more powdery mildew, things like that, just disappearing entirely. And I said, okay, so I've been farming for 20 years, and I didn't know any of these things. Maybe I should start. And it seems like there's something going on here. Even though I don't really understand it, I feel like I want to start talking about it. And so I started giving workshops and courses, and you were at one of them early on there when I was not quite as practiced. But sort of that turned into an organization, an educational organization called the Bionutrient Food Association. And so I've been working in the last couple of years full time. Prior to that, sort of part time farming to make my money, but running the organization on the side. But the last couple of years, it's been pretty much a full time job. And our mission is to increase quality in the food supply. And by quality, we mean flavor, aroma, nutritive value, health-giving attribute, those things that correlate with vitality in ourselves, which we think also correlate directly with plant health and soil health, etc. So that's sort of the lens, or the thing that we're doing that no other organization seems to be really focusing on, is what this term we've been popularizing called nutrient density, which effectively refers to the difference in nutritional value levels between this carrot and that carrot. If you go to the USDA averages, or you talk to food scientists, they'll say, a carrot has 7 milligrams of vitamin D per 100 grams of carrot. And that's an average, but it certainly is not what every carrot has. Some carrots might have 0.1 milligrams, and some carrots might have 25. The variations are actually massive in nutrient levels in food, which correlates with flavor, correlates with aroma, correlates with health-giving attribute. And so a lot of what's grown, with tillage and with fertilizer and with chemicals and things like that may have volume, but it actually is relatively empty as far as nutrition is concerned. And so we had initially a simple tool called a refractometer, with which you could use to test relative nutrient levels. You do need to take the crop and take a chunk out of it, squish it, and read the juice. So it doesn't really work in the grocery store or at the farmer's market.
Works good in the field.
It's true.
Works good in the field. I've got mine in my truck.
It works true. And there's no battery. You can use it 10,000 times, and it'll still keep working until you drop it, right? I mean, it's like, it's simple. Yeah. So we thought, if it does seem to be true, which as, we're getting more and more across the country, different climate zones, different types of crops, people are getting similar results across the board when they basically work well with life, when they, ensure that the microbial communities in the soil are flourishing, and then the plants have access to some of these basic environmental conditions that, boy, it looks like you don't need to add nitrogen for your broccoli, or you don't need to, spray proactively for powdery mildew or early blight. These things that we've been taught are only necessary in systems where life is not flourishing. So we thought, and also it seems to correlate directly that there's a dramatic increase in soil carbon, which comes from this process, as we were talking about before, with the plants going through photosynthesis and feeding the soil life. If you don't have a well-functioning gut flora and you're basically giving the plants fertilizer, then that's like an IV drip. Like, you can be kept alive on an IV drip as an animal, but it's really not how you were supposed to digest your food. So the more we stimulate microbial life, the more all these systems begin to function well. And so we said, if this is true, this could be really powerful in addressing some of our broader cultural existential issues of climate and health and farm viability and ecosystem function, all these kinds of things, where agriculture is really a pretty destructive force broadly, globally, and has historically been in a lot of cultures. It was nice, and then they farmed, and then it was a desert, right? Then the culture collapsed. So historically, agriculture has been quite destructive, as opposed to what the indigenous communities in North America were doing, which was a much more sophisticated version of agriculture, I would argue, where they were actively managing the land, facilitating a dynamic where there was an immense amount of food, but they weren't destroying ecosystems. They were actually supporting ecosystems. So our thought is, how can we leverage this deeper understanding to shift the way farming is done to help solve some of these deeper issues? And our thought was that the way this culture seems to work is based on money. And if there's not an economic incentive for it to happen, it's probably not going to happen. And so our thought was, how can we apply an economic incentive to this food supply where people are incentivized to produce and purchase high quality, nutrient dense food? And our thought was, because it's not exactly like you are nutrient dense or you aren't, it's a continuum. You're either at 10% on the continuum or 40% or 80%. There's no like cutoff point where you're GMO or non-GMO, you're organic or non-organic, right? It's that we don't. There's not. It doesn't work that way. It's not binary. Life works in these continuums, not in these sort of binary dynamics. And so we said, the only real way we think that people will have the ability to make decisions based on relative nutrient levels in crops is if we can test for it. And so we, had this idea that you can, with a tool called a spectrometer, you can functionally flash a light at a carrot and read the light that bounces back and see what's in the carrot. It's how, astronomers can tell you what various stars are made up of, is because every element in chemistry, copper or zinc, has a vibration in physics. It has a certain light that it vibrates at. And so if we can take a picture of something that's 5 light years away or 50 billion light years away, or not, 5 billion light years away. I don't think 50 billion is possible, but maybe 15. Anyway, we can take a picture of something 5 billion light years away and we can see what it is. We should be able to take a picture of something 5 millimeters away and see what it is. That was the concept. And so we wanted it to be handheld. We wanted it to be consumer price point. We wanted it to be completely transparent, open source. All the data is in the commons, doesn't belong to any company, can't be perverted. If all the data is in the commons and anybody can verify it, then it's going to be really hard to take it sideways later when industry realizes that they're up the creek, because we're exposing the relative quality of what they're producing. So we started a project 4 years ago called the Real Food Campaign, which is a collaboration amongst Real Food Campaign. It's a collaboration amongst a number of different organizations. NOFA Mass is one of our partners. There's PASA from Pennsylvania. There's Virginia Association of Biological Farmers. There's Organic Ag Association of Kentucky. There's a bunch of nonprofit partners. There's a bunch of universities. I think we were talking about Chico State. There's a bunch of the Northern Tier, University of Minnesota, University of Maine, University of Montana are all partners. We've got General Mills and Pipeline Foods and Bank of America. There's a bunch of different partners that have come together on this project. We've got 3 basic objectives. One is to build a spectrometer that can test things in real time. 2 is to figure out what the variation in nutrient levels is. So until we've defined the variation, we can't calibrate the meter, if that makes sense. You can take a picture of the light that bounces back, but you can't translate that into a meaningful answer. And then the third objective is to figure out what causes quality. We want to be able to understand what environmental conditions are causal so that we can give that information to growers proactively, because the last thing we want is for the grower to go to the market and the market says, we don't want your stuff because it's no good. We want any grower who's wanting to be part of this process to have free access to all the knowledge. Globally, all scales, not just big farms, but everybody should have access to this information. So that we started in 2016. In 2017, we built the first generation of our spectrometer. In 2018, we built our first lab. We started testing our first 2 crops to identify variation. 2019, we started to do all the data collection on all the different management practices. So, what was your fertility program? What's your soil type? What's your management practice? What were your genetics? When did you plant? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this year we're working on, I think, about 150 farms across North America and Europe. We're doing 20 different crops. We've just got our first basic calibrations for our machine, the first generation spectrometer, so that for the 6 crops we did last year, carrots, spinach, lettuce, tomatoes, kale, and grapes, if you flash a light at the grape or at the carrot, we won't promise you it's the right answer. We're only about 75% comfortable, but it'll say red, yellow, or green. This is in the top quartile, the bottom quartile, or the middle 50%. So we've basically accomplished proof of concept in this project. Building basically a ray gun that you can take to the grocery store, or that some retailer or wholesaler or agronomist could use in the field or anywhere in the supply chain. And yeah, the first generation unit is like an Apple II. If anybody ever remembers an Apple II, a couple people remember what an Apple II looks like. It was a long time ago in the early 80s, and it was like, it worked, right? It wasn't the mainframe, it was a personal computer, but it certainly is not a cell phone. So next generation is, or next step is taking the engineering. We verified that we can do this. We built momentum, we've built reputation. Now we're getting more interest from significant players who say, okay, this looks like it's really important. How much do you need to take it to the next level? So it can be not just a nice little tool, but a real instrument, a real scientific instrument.